Hello and welcome to Healing Within 23. Lovely to have the opportunity to bring more information to you. And upcoming shows, we hope to have somebody to talk about 5G energy. So that should be something. Oh, hello, Natasha. It's lovely to have you on board. Hope you can join us for the rest of the show, and maybe you've got questions that you would like to ask and have answered as well. We will have some upcoming guests in a few weeks. Actually, next week is on standby. We don't really know whether somebody is going to drop in or not. They haven't made up their mind. I can't say it's because of my pretty face, so we'll just say that they're undecided. Tonight we are going to be discussing, hi Jess, how are you? Lovely to have you on board. Tonight we're going to be discussing grief and loss. Now this is something which affects all of us, and unfortunately a lot of people don't want to know about grief and loss. It's the part that hits them the hardest. Yeah, health and love, that's definitely the areas that we love to work from. But in the essence of grief and loss, it's about how we heal ourselves so that we can get past some of those things. And we always associate grief and loss with, yeah, probably Natasha, we always seem to associate grief and loss with death and dying, and that is a major aspect of grief. But when you think about it, yeah, my apologies for probably hitting a nerve there, Jess. But we'll probably get to that a little bit later. I lost my dad to cancer and my mum to an aneurysm, so that is one of the areas I'll probably be hitting tonight. But we seem to head in that simple direction of that, but we need to look at it from another angle, which to me is we lose things on a daily basis. So perhaps somebody loses their job. Now that is a loss. So they go through the same 5 steps of grieving over the loss of their job. Yeah. Yeah, I was crying buckets too when my parents passed away. Just I have lost my job a few times, and I must admit that I went through some of the aspects, and what I'm going to do is put up the aspects for you. But before I do that, just going to run through the aspects we really need to have is please share with friends and family so that we can make this program a lot better. We can hit a broader atmosphere, we hit more people, we can bring more information to more people and help everybody to heal themselves. Feel free to ask questions at any time. And the other one that I would like to bring up is, please, if you're interested in the topics that we bring to you, please type heal into the comments, and hopefully the little bot will chase you up either today or tomorrow looking for information. We're trying to broaden this as far as we can. And if you have comments that you would like to make on tonight's show as we go along, please ask questions, make comments. Everybody suffers from one form of loss or another, so we can say that this is a generous aspect that we all go through at some point in our lives. Now, I have lost my job a couple of times, and I have to admit that I went through some of the stages of grief, and we tend to ignore them. I mean, the first one we're going to go through is the classic, the denial, and that's generally the first aspect that we go through. We haven't lost the job. We try to be quiet. We try not to influence anybody else in the family. We really don't want to tell them we're in denial from the point of that aspect. And then once we get through that, generally we will go into the anger stage, and you realise that you can't deny it any longer. So we're angry either at ourselves or at the situation that we're going through. And then we go through a third stage, which is, bargaining. This is probably, we do a lot of that, and we bargain with ourselves. If I did this better, this wouldn't happen. If I did that better, the outcome would have been different. All of these we do, whether this is death, dying, or any other form. If it's a loss, I'm going to go into another area shortly, and then we go into depression. I'm so sad, why bother with anything? We put ourselves so low that it's very difficult sometimes for us to get out of it. Mary Lou has put up a comment, Mary Ann, grief from loss of both parents, my mum in 1985, 34 years ago, and still holding grief. Lost, miscarriages, etc. And both of those are terrible aspects to have to use. And I would presume that you have been through most of these steps yourself, Marianne. The fifth one is the acceptance stage, in that it's going to be okay. I can't fight it. I may as well prepare for it, or I may as well become cognizant of what's happened, and I can't change the outcome. I have to learn to live with what's happening. Now, I don't want to make fun of people who have lost parents or loved ones or miscarriages, but I was hoping to start with the lesser aspects that we really don't take a lot of notice of. And a person, for instance, a woman may have a mastectomy, and she will lose either the breast or part of the breast, and that too is a loss. And the same emotions go through that we would at any other loss. If we lose a finger or a hand or a leg, these are losses we can learn to live with. But we still go through the same process of the denial, the acceptance. We might drop off one of the stages, but we will generally go through all of them at some point. If not immediately, then we will go through them later. We may store up this loss, this grief from a loss of work, a loss of a child, mastectomy. There you go, breast cancer. Speaking of breast cancer, I'm going to use Olivia Newton-John as a reference here. I don't know her, and I have no permission to use what she has done, but I saw the 60 minutes of what she goes through, and the first time that she went through the cancer situation, she went through the 5 stages. And for some reason, they've now expanded that to 7 stages. I'm not sure why. Originally, Elizabeth Kubler-Ross had books out on death and dying and grief and loss, and there were 5 aspects that I put up on the screen there. And since then, they have come to the point of saying that they think that they've shortchanged some of the people, and there should be 7 steps. Honestly, I think the 5 were there, and that's pretty much how it started. And if you want to add a couple in, then you haven't changed anything. You've just added to the increase in the loss. Olivia went through the first one, and I'm pretty sure that she went through the whole gamut of emotions. My mum died of breast cancer 85, no mammograms, then when first diagnosed 3 years earlier. Yes, 5 aspects I'm aware of with grief. Yes. We make fun of it and we try to avoid the topic as much as possible because it involves mainly the heavy aspects of somebody passing. And to be truthful, sometimes I think that if we lose an animal, we grieve far more for the animal than we do for people who are close to us. When my mother and father passed, it was a long period, so we saw it coming, and we went through probably a couple of the stages early. Probably the denial aspect and possibly the anger aspect we went through early. But when the time came for recognition that it was an eventuality we had to face, we got through it and we came to the acceptance stage. And although the grief was there and the memories were there and all that afterwards, I relied on the memories to make the passage so much easier. But over a period of time of maybe 6 months or more, there were things that came up. And I had to deal with those things again and again until eventually I came to a point where the acceptance was wholehearted. But it's been probably 12 months, close on 12 months now since we lost our last dog. And honestly, there are times when it still hits me because she went very quickly and I was not prepared for the loss of that contact. And I think the reaction was probably more involved for the pet than what it had been for my parents, because I had seen their demise and what they were going through coming. So that was an aspect that I was able to go through the early steps, probably before their passing. Whereas when something happens quickly, whether it's family, whether it's friends, whether it's an animal, if it happens quickly, it tends to grab us and we store information. We store energy, we store anger, we store... sometimes we bring up the bad stuff in the memories in the hopes of remembering them more, but it doesn't help. It just causes the memories to linger longer and the clarity to leave, and we hold the grief so much longer. But we really associate the grief that comes with death and dying. But grief and loss can be about anything. Absolutely anything. For children, it can be the loss of a friend because they've got to move to a new school. Sometimes people have to change countries for their job, and a child or a person can go through grief and loss for that transition. So the aspect of grief and loss is not restricted to the more heinous side of grief and loss, which is death and dying. And sometimes we forget that our children can suffer quietly because we're trying to be very strong, and our children see us as not showing those emotions of explaining why we're angry or why we're in denial or why we are going through what we're going through. And our children begin to grow up with the aspect that we must remain closed off when it comes to grief and loss. And I would encourage anybody that is going through grief and loss and has children to try and involve the children in what they're going through, so that the children understand that you may be quiet, but you're quiet because you're thinking about the loss. Whatever that loss might be, if it's a loss of a job or changing of a country or something like that, involve your children and involve your partner. it's very difficult to hold a lot of this stuff in. It doesn't do us any good at all. We just store it up, and at some point we have to release it. And if we don't release it, it will come back and bite us again and again and again. Now, there's a lot of counsellors out there, and there is a lot of people who will tell you that they deal with these problems and how to handle them. If you need to visit these people, then I suggest that you do so wholeheartedly. But understand that if you know what the 5 stages of grief are, and you're willing to look at what's going on in your mind and what you're saying to friends and family, then the chances are that you will recognize it, and you will be able to get through and see that what stage you're in. Let's have a look. Sorry, Marianne, I didn't roll the thing. That I'm going through grief with my son moving out of home. I miss him, his company and chats. But no, it's another stage of my life. I'm trying to embrace the situation, and that's brilliant, Marianne, that you are doing that. And just by the sheer comments that you've stated, you've already probably gone through a couple of the stages of grief and loss. The 5 stages there. We all, especially when our children are moving out, we have that loss. It's suddenly there's a hole. We walk into a room and there's no one there. Sometimes through misadventure or misfortune. Sometimes it could be a breakup with our child with somebody else, that they come back home again, and then there's that rebirth of connection. And if they move out again, then there's loss again. And every time that this goes on in our lives, it probably doesn't get as bad the second time, or if it happens more than once, but we still go through the same aspects of denial. Why has my child moved out? The anger stage, if I had been more communicative or something like that, they might have stayed a little bit longer. There are always aspects of our lives that we look into, and sometimes we might start bargaining with our kids, even if it's for them to move out. This also is a form of bargaining, in that if your son or your daughter is getting older, you want a bit of peace and quiet time, so we try to bargain with them. Go with somebody else for a little bit and then trial it and come back, so that we don't have that sudden loss in our lives. And when they move out, we can sometimes go into that depressive state of, I'm so sad, why bother going to work, why bother doing this, why bother doing that, when in actual fact we're just missing those people because they have moved on to a new part of their life, and we need to move on to a new part of ours. Now, I'm not trying to make light of people who have lost children or any of those aspects of people who have lost fathers, mothers, uncles, aunts, nieces, nephews, whatever. These are very sad things, and we take time to go through them, and depending on how close the person was to us, depends on how we relate to the 5 stages of grief and loss. Many of the people that I know that have gone through that sometimes blame other people for the loss. And if you've lost a child, sometimes without thinking about it, we can say things that will make you feel inadequate. I think some of the worst things that you can say to somebody that's going through the grief of that is, or you have another child, or you can have another child. This just reinforces on that person that they've already lost something and their grief is suddenly increased. So if you happen to come across a situation where somebody has lost a child and you're aware of it, then you've really got to be cautious about how you respond to that person. Is there a good thing to say? I'm honestly not sure, but mentioning other children is probably not the situation you want to mention when they're going through such a thing as the loss of a child or stillbirth or something along that fashion. I'm happy to see that one person here, and we've had one comment so far, and a few comments have been put up there. Many of the things that we inadvertently say later in our conversations with people, we sometimes leave them on their own because we don't know how to respond to their loss or their grief. And we say things maybe 6 months down the line when they may still be going through the grief process, and we think that they are so much better and they are putting on that lovely face that says, oh, I'm fine, I'm feeling really good now, I've got over it, and I'm dealing with everything and I'm really good. And sometimes we will say something about the past loved one or the past animal or about the children leaving home, and we will not be aware that we have simply brought to the surface images or feelings that this person hasn't dealt with. So even 6 months, 12 months down the line, we can still have those aspects of our life from the grief or the loss coming through. And one of the things that I found most interesting was my father had been gone for probably 2 or 3 years, and I passed a gentleman in the street who wore Californian poppy aftershave and hairdressing cream. And the smell of the poppy, Californian poppy, just wafted up my nose. And all of a sudden, I had memories floating in the back of my head about my father and the rabbiting trips that we took, and just little things that came up. And it's amazing how a smell or even a colour can bring back some of those memories, and we need to deal with that grief again. It's something that we hadn't dealt with. So we anticipate that, it's all going to be over very quickly. I've been to the funeral, I've grieved for my parents, I've done this and I've done that, and it's all over and done with now. Well, truthfully, it's not. It could be 5 years down the track and something will set you off. I've had occasion where I've seen a woman walking down the street, and from the back I would have sworn it was my mother. And that, knowing that she has already passed, it's like just a friendly reminder that, somebody is watching out for me, and that, yes, she might be gone, but she's still in the memories. And I figure that the best thing that we can say to ourselves is when something like that happens, but we're being contacted and given a boost to say we're on the right path, we're dealing with it, and they're watching out for us. Now, I'm just going to go back over these five steps. Now, the first one is generally denial. Now, that doesn't always mean to say that the first one will be denial, but in most cases, we begin to deny aspects of what we're going through, in that we deny that we had any activity or any closeness to what the person was going through, what they felt. And sometimes we will have grief and loss at the fact that we didn't do anything for that person. Sometimes we might have seen it coming, and yeah, a song too is sufficient. Sometimes it can be a song that you regularly played with your parents or with that friend as they went through, and it will bring back those memories again. If it feels harsh, then you haven't dealt with it. If it's like, oh, that reminds me of so and so, then you may well have dealt with it, and what you're getting is just a memory coming through to say, you know, this person was in my life, I appreciated them, and I still appreciate the fact that they did a lot for me. Excuse me while I drink. We'll go on to the second stage, and I know that people really don't want to talk about grief and loss, but it is an aspect of our lives that we need to look at very closely because it happens to us all. Now, the second one is when the individual recognises that denial can't continue. We go through that stage of denying that anything happened. I could have done anything. I could have done something better. We go through that stage, and then we go into anger, mostly at ourselves. And we start abusing ourselves. You stupid person, if you'd have done this, if you'd have done that, if you'd have spent more time, if you had done blah, blah, blah. Or perhaps it's the fact that you have a cancer or something like that, and you'll get angry with yourself in saying that if I'd changed my life earlier, this would not have happened, and you're an idiot for not doing this sooner. Well, in truth, there's no way of knowing whether that would have actually eventuated. Had you have changed your diet, had you have changed doing this at work, would it have changed anything? You really don't know. You just become, I think, more aware and more caring in what you do after you've been through that experience. So children who lose their grandparents when they're young experience a sense of loss and grief, especially if they're close to that grandparent. But they learn very early on that death is a part of life and hurt is a part of life. And it's how we discuss these things with the children when it happens that makes the difference. And sometimes the children will get angry because they think they're the ones that caused what happened. They may have had a slight argument or something with the grandparent, and that grandparent has passed away a little bit later. And they won't realise what's happening, and they may blame themselves for it. Now, this one is probably a little bit harder to analyse as an individual, but we do start bargaining with ourselves. Now, to take it from the point of view of, say, a job or something like that, again, we come back to this aspect of, had I have done something different, would the outcome have been totally different? If I'd been less boisterous with the boss, would I have kept my job? These are aspects that we look at, and we try to generate ideas as to whether we are at fault. And depending on the situation, you may have been very outspoken with management at work about an issue which you considered dangerous for other people. But in doing so, you put yourself on a short list, and they have not so much put you on a list to be made redundant, but they watch you a little bit more closely, and you begin to feel that they are trying to find errors with you so that they don't have to put up with your aspects of the bargaining, and in trying to see a way out of the grief of what you've been through, you may very well end up going into another aspect of the grief and loss, which is depression. You'll get yourself so enamored with where you're going and what you're doing that you'll get into a depressed state about, I don't know whether I've done the right thing. I don't know whether this is how I should be talking. I don't know whether that's something I should have done. And then that drags you into a very low aspect, and it's tough to get out of that aspect. And if it's related to a greater loss, such as an animal or a person, then that depression it can be debilitating. It can draw you into a long-term funk where you just don't know how to get out of it. Everything seems to be clawing at you, and you can't seem to find an answer to anything. And in doing so, you tend to overlook things that you should be doing, and then those things collapse in on you, which makes the depression even greater. There is no finite answer for how long something like this can last. It is an aspect of loss that sometimes the depression is only slight, but normally when we're talking about the loss of a person or an animal, then we go into a funk which is pretty tough to get out of. But if we look at it from the loss of maybe the loss of an organ, an intestinal operation, it could be prostate, could be anything in the body where something is taken from us. We have a sense of emptiness, a sense that something is not there that should be there. And even though we know what it is and where it is and why it had to be removed, that doesn't remove the loss or the grief from that action. Even if you go in for just day surgery, for a minor operation, you will generally come out with a sense of not depression, but a slight funk that you have done something and something has changed, and you don't know what exactly, but something has changed. And then we get to the last aspect, according to Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, which is it's going to be okay. I can't fight it. I may as well prepare for it. Now, the prepare for it is generally like when we're talking about operations or a passing or something like that. We really don't want to prepare for somebody that's passing, but we have to. If we're going in for an operation, whether it's an amputation, whether it is to remove cancer, tumour, or something like that, we have to come to a point where we say it's going to be okay. We have to find a positive aspect, and you can't fight it. You have to go in, and it has to happen. And fight as you might, it happens, and you've got to go along with it. And once you reach this stage, I think you're on the road to recovery. Now, I know that some of the people here tonight have had miscarriages, and that's something that on the first occasion is probably very debilitating, but you may get to an acceptance stage and you say, right, we'll try again. Now, there suddenly comes an aspect in the early stages where mentally the woman may begin to think, well, this is about the time when we had problems with the last try. And the very aspect of bringing that to the fore is bringing up that grief and loss again. And we believe that the acceptance has passed, but in truth, we go into a fear stage. Probably, I'd say probably close to the bargaining and denial aspect. Sorry, Jesse. That's I know it's difficult to get through that, and it's always harder, honestly, on the second one. And if there happens to be a third, it takes a great deal of energy and emotional stability to try again. I don't know whether you have, and I wish you the best if you haven't. But there's honestly, I don't know how to offer my condolences more than what I am. But having said that, I hope that you have managed to go through the steps and have come to a stage of acceptance where you understand that possibly it was their time to experience just that aspect, and that you were the channel for their start of life. All right, let's see what we get here. I actually had crystal healing a few weeks before I fell pregnant with my youngest rainbow baby. Did that help for you, Jesse? You say it wasn't the right tone. Yeah. Yeah, I'm happy that you acknowledge and love your angel babies now. And I'm glad to see that the acceptance is there and they understand how hard it is for somebody to go through that. Yeah, time is an aspect. For some people, it will vary immensely. For some people, a few weeks is long enough to grieve and experience a loss. But for others, it takes forever and a day for the loss of a loved one, somebody you've lived with for 40 years or 50 years. It can be a terrible experience. Marianne, generally rainbow babies are babies who have either come into the world and passed very soon after, or they are children which have not come to full term. We talk about rainbow children, but that's a different topic. These are children which have found their spirituality early. And in the case of rainbow babies, it means that they came in for we believe that they came in for a specific reason. They've achieved that reason, which may have been short-term or birth, and then that's all they wanted to experience. Unfortunately, it leaves the mother with a great sense of loss. And perhaps, I don't want to be cruel in any way, but perhaps that's part of the learning lesson as well. Not just for the child, but also for the there's another aspect. I wasn't aware of that one. Thank you very much for that, Jesse. This is another aspect that I haven't heard used in that particular drain, but I will keep that in mind and use that in the future if you don't mind. I was led to believe that a rainbow baby was one that had either just came to term and was lost, or had not quite come to term and was lost. I'm happy that you have two children which have been conceived successfully. and they have birthed after a loss. I hope that brings you great joy, and I hope that they bring every moment of expectation that you expected from the one that you have lost. There you go. I am learning a great deal from you, Jesse. I'm thankful that you have brought this up for other people. If you see this in replay, please just let everyone know that these terms are out there. I am not aware of the sunset and sunrise babies. That's a new one to me. I had heard of shooting stars, but I wasn't quite sure on what that was related to. I assumed that that was, in this case, like twins that had come very soon after a loss. But again, I could be wrong with that. Anything I can do to help and spread the love? Well, I honestly, Jesse, I think you have probably hit the heart of a lot of people. And if anybody tunes in at a later point, they will be in awe, I think, of you and what you've been through, and the fact that you have 2 children and have overcome that aspect of your loss. And I hope that you went through it with a minimum of problems. Sometimes we don't realize how long it takes for people to acquire acceptance about the loss of a young one, especially. Is there anybody out there that can associate a loss that is not to do with a person? Because sometimes we forget that loss comes in all its forms and all its conundrums and the problems that it goes through. I will put up, for those people that are may watch this in replay, I'm going to put that there. This is a couple of sites that are available for people who may already be experiencing a loss of some description. Yes, a loss of oneself is another aspect of grief and loss. That's a very broad aspect, and it's not easy to actually find the fundamentals of that one. But we do constantly go through a sense of depression. A lot of people suffer from the depression. Now, I have put up there the Friends of Elizabeth Kubler-Ross. That's a Facebook page which is very good, and a lot of people talk about grief and loss on that particular channel. And there is the Kubler-Ross Foundation, and if anybody is going through grief and loss, you might want to check these out. Elizabeth Kubler-Ross put out a great many books on death and dying, grief and loss, how to talk to children about grief and loss. So I find I try to encourage people to go down that path. Now, I have a sheet here which states that there are 7 stages of grief. I'll mention the 7 in the sense that I don't want to find people who do counselling today. They now have the 7 series, so I want to mention all the 7 that they now have. And the first being guilt. I'm not sure why guilt is considered in there when denial is probably looking at the guilt aspect, but they have guilt, denial, shock and disbelief, They have anger and bargaining, depression, loneliness and reflection, and reconstruction and working through, and then acceptance. To me, acceptance is reconstruction and working through. But in today's technology and training, a lot of things that Elizabeth and others have brought to the fore have been extended and made to fit a new world of technology. And that seems to be the latest thing. There's actually now a concept of loss related to technology, in that children, when taken away from computers, tablets, phones, go through the same 7 steps of, well, 5 steps of denial, anger, acceptance, all of those, when they are restricted or prevented from having their technology. And this is becoming a new emotional aspect that is going through a lot of the psychological and psychology, psychotherapy, and all of these aspects are now taking this as being the new dis-ease for children. So when you think about grief and loss, and we talk about parents, we talk about children, we talk about grandparents, we talk about animals, but we're coming to a stage now where if people don't have their phones and their iPads, then they go into depression and they go into anger, and it's so hard. ADHD and ASD are aspects that sometimes technology can help with, but I believe that in my own self, I can't say this from a psychology standpoint, but truly I believe that the use of iPads and iPhones to keep your children quiet when they're very, very young, prior to kindergarten or school, is removing from them the aspect of authority. Now, I don't want to say that your child doesn't have the authority aspect because they have ADHD and ASD. But there are a lot of children who, when they get to school, have had so much time on tablets, and then they're suddenly expected to stop using this tablet or the phone and stop playing games, and they have to sit and listen to somebody telling them something. And all of a sudden, the teachers are now having to correlate the children to different energies, because they become very angry, and the parents say, oh, well, it's never like that at home. And that's because when they get home, their parents are probably very busy. They may both be working. They may not have a great deal of time. They come home from work and they've got to get stuck into the stuff that has to be done, the cleaning, the cooking, and all the other stuff that has to be done. And it's just easier for them to stick them in front of a computer or a tablet and say, can you watch this until I finish doing what I'm doing? They're not doing it out of spite or to make their children angry at school, but they can't understand the aspects that this technology is something that's going to be taken away from them when they get to school, and the child is going to suffer from a loss. And I guess we don't really promote this either in the health system or in the school system when they have Parents' Day and the like. We sometimes forget that we've got to mention this to the parents, that if they spend too much time with the computer, they are going to become supremely dependent on the computer. It's coming to a stage at the moment where people can't even give change in their mind. They have to use a calculator to use a machine or a calculator to figure out change. And when we've got to that stage, we're so dependent upon the technology that when it's taken away from us, we don't know what to do. We suddenly become angry. We suddenly become despondent. We suddenly blame everybody else for what's going on in the world. And these are all different forms of loss and grief that are now becoming more prevalent. For the older people, we have probably been through most of the stuff we've had to do mentally or physically, and we haven't had the computer or the technology. And we're not so dependent upon it, and which is probably why most of us, as we get older, can't handle the speed at which this form of technology changes. And even that is a form of grief and loss. We become despondent, and we get to the stage where we begin to enter depression and bargaining. We try to get people to do the job for us. Instead of learning how to do something, we want other people to do it for us, which is our bargaining aspect. And we hit depression because we can't handle the amount of change that's going on in our lives. So even this is a form of grief and loss. So everything that we go through on a day-to-day basis is in some way a form of grief and loss. And I hope that I have not bored you with too much of this. We always associate grief and loss with death and dying. And both of those subjects are true, but we fail to see that it's the little things that prepare us for the bigger things. So if we can learn to handle the loss and the emotions for the smaller losses, when the big ones come, such as the departing of a family member or a family pet, or a change of circumstance or a change of location, we can handle them a lot better, and we can share them a lot better. One of the big things that most of these people, including Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, mentioned was sharing. And if you have somebody that you can confide in and talk with, this can help you to go through a lot of the emotions that we've talked about very quickly. I'm not saying it's going to happen overnight, but the availability of somebody who's willing to listen and just listen will allow you to go through your grieving, through your depression, through your anger, through your denial. It will allow you to go through that more solidly, more quicker. And speaking about it is brilliant if you're doing it with your partner. If you're talking with your children about it and they're old enough to understand, some of them are too young to understand, but you sometimes need to make it, dumb it down a little bit. I don't like to use that phrase, but for very young children, it's something you have to be cautious about how you talk to your children about it. I think we have just about come to the end of where I can go with this tonight. We hope to have somebody in next week, but we have not had a confirmation, and so I'm going to leave it a little bit for another couple of days before I post what the next person will be bringing on. But I hope that you have managed to find some relief or some comments and some help either on those sites or on the discussion tonight. And I thank you very much for putting your comments in tonight. It's been more than welcome, and it's given us something to talk about. And especially to you, Jesse, for your comments, and I appreciate what you put up there. If you're watching this in replay, please type heal in the comments, and hopefully the little bot will catch up with you in the next day or two, and we'll try and promote more of this in the future. If you have something that you would like to see discussed on one of the shows, again, please leave it in the comments, and we will do our utmost to try and find somebody that can discuss the topic that you're after at some point in the near future. Thank you very much for tonight, and I hope to catch up with you next week, 7:30 p.m. Wednesday evening each week, so tune in for us, and we look forward to having you again next week. This is Roy Fensham from Healing Within, and I look forward to seeing you at next Wednesday for Healing Within 24.